Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Brownfield Services and Grant Readiness 101 webinar. My name is Dan Cholker, and I'm the lead Brownfields coordinator at Ohio EPA. We are very pleased to partner with Kansas State University Technical Assistance to Brownfields, or KSU TAB, and US EPA to provide you with today's training. Amazing things are happening in the brownfield world, and we hope this training will help you determine your capacity to participate. In our next slide, we will take a look at the agenda. We have a deep lineup of speakers today. First, we have Roxanne Anderson, the Director of Region 5 at KSU TAB, who will cover housekeeping and logistics for this webinar. After that, we will begin with Brownfields 101, provided by Amy Yursevich, a KSU TAB partner. Then Shelby Powell, a Brownfield coordinator with the Ohio EPA, we'll go over some free brownfield services, Ohio's Voluntary Action Program, as well as some other grants around the state. Carla Acker, a US EPA project coordinator, will then go over the federal brownfield grants offered every year. After a short break, we will then get into the meat of today's webinar, where we help you determine if you have the capacity to manage a grant, how to get started, and what resources you have access to. For this part of the webinar, Amy Yursevich and Beth Grigsby, another KSU TAB partner, will be accompanied by a panel that includes the experts speaking today, as well as Amber Martin with the City of Lima and Jen Lintz with the Cincinnati Port Authority. Jen and Amber will follow up with presentations on their experiences in their communities. We are hopeful that the information provided today will give you the tools to move forward on your brownfield projects, no matter what stage you are in. And with that, I will turn it over to Roxanne.
Thanks, Dan. Next, as Dan mentioned, I just want to go over a few technical points before we get started. If you guys have any technical difficulties with your connection, you can please call 785-200-7005 or email chsr@ksu.edu, and someone should be able to assist you. We are recording this workshop today, and the recording, along with the presentation slides and resources, will be available on KSU TAB website, where you registered for this event within the next few days. That link is also going to be shared in the chat box. Next. A few reminders to ensure a pleasant experience for everyone. All participants are automatically muted with their video turned off. However, we would like for this to be as interactive as possible, so we encourage you to ask questions throughout the event today. If you want to do that, you can just do so by using the chat feature in the Zoom bar on the side, and we will be monitoring that and insert your questions as needed. Next. To make sure that we're able to verify your attendance, please make sure that your participant name also matches your registration name. Sorry, go ahead. For those of you who are not familiar with KSU TAB, we are one of 6 technical assistance programs in the United States funded by a US EPA grant. The TAB service providers provide free services that are tailored to specific needs in planning, economic development, and environmental challenges. KSU covers the US EPA regions 5, 6, 7, and 8. Next. One of the free services that KSU TAB provides are educational workshops and webinars that help communities with various challenges, like the one focusing on grant readiness today. It's extremely important to us to hear from participants so we can continuously improve and keep our content relevant. At the end of today's event, please take some time to fill out a brief survey about your experience. You can pull that up now utilizing the web link or the QR box with your phone so that you don't forget. Next. And with that, I will hand it off to Amy Yursevich to start us off. Thank you.
Thanks, Roxanne. I am going to talk a little bit about Brownfields 101, what brownfields are, and why it's good to do redevelopment of brownfields. For some of you, this may be old hat, but if you're new to this, hopefully this will provide you with some good information. Next. First, let's get to the legal definitions or the definitions of brownfields. They're pretty similar between federal and Ohio, and actually federal and other states. They're going to be talking about property, whether it's real property, and that property may have redevelopment potential. And it's in a good spot. It's got good infrastructure that exists. The location is important for maybe transportation or recreation, different things like that. But the redevelopment is hampered by the potential presence of hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants. Basically, it's a property that has a lot of redevelopment or some redevelopment potential, and the fact that there's pollutants or contaminants on that property or maybe is hampering its redevelopment. Next. So it's difficult to develop because it is contaminated, and we'll get into that in a minute. Generally, these are not Superfund sites that have millions of barrels full of chemicals. You don't know what they are and how toxic they are. It's low to moderate levels of contamination most of the time. Hazardous substances, this can be different chemicals that have been used, from petroleum to different types of chemicals that are used in manufacturing. Asbestos, lead paint, could be mold as well. Meth lab contaminants are also part of this, and mine-scarred lands. Next. So many property types can be brownfields, including some that you might not necessarily think of when you think of brownfields or an old abandoned commercial or industrial site, such as churches and schools. But often these can have fuel tanks. They might have asbestos in their piping, things like that. Something like at the top of the second column, marinas. Well, marinas often dispense petroleum, gasoline, and they do repair work. Agricultural suppliers, a lot of the agricultural types of chemicals that are used can be toxic to humans. And so they could be considered brownfields as well. So there's a whole host of properties that really fall under that umbrella of brownfields. Next. So why does contamination cause so much complication? Why not just clean it up? Why is everybody so afraid of this? Next. Well, because of Superfund, a law that was passed to really be very helpful in the case of large sites. You might want to think of something like Love Canal, where waste and petroleum were dumped in a big old ditch for many, many years, or as in this picture, somewhere where barrels were just dumped. And, back in the day, a lot of times, in some cases they did, but in a lot of cases they did not know the level of toxicity or problems that these were going to cause the businesses when they dump these. So these can cause huge problems, not only in the area where things are dumped or spilled, but also in the groundwater. Also, it can spread out through the soils, through the air, and cause a lot of problems for nearby residents. So that's the reason CERCLA was developed, also known as Superfund. And because of that, because it usually involved a number of businesses or industries, you had joint and several liability. It's not always distributed equally. If you're in the chain of title, which is what we mean by strict, whether or not you had anything to do with the spill or the dumping, it's going to if you're in the chain of title and you haven't checked fully as to what was what was on the property at the time, you may be found at fault whether you did anything to help this or not. And it is wide in scope. As I mentioned, that it can get in the groundwater, it can be airborne. So you're not just talking about the property where the contamination exists or spilled. It actually can go to many, many other properties, including residences. So it's a good law, but it's a very all-encompassing law. And when you have properties that aren't as contaminated, that don't rise to the level of Superfund, it can be a problem because those properties also maintain that same type of liability scheme. Next. So because of that, that's often the perception of the contamination that keeps properties from being redeveloped, not actually the contamination. It's the big unknown. So without any type of environmental investigation, people really don't know what's there. There might be something there based on what the businesses were in that location, and that is what keeps developers away or people from looking into purchasing the property. Once that stigma's gone, they can be returned to productive use. And as I mentioned, investigating and possibly cleaning up property is what typically needs to be done to get rid of that stigma. Next. Okay, look, Brownfield's laws and incentives. This went a long way for helping brownfields. It's the Federal Small Business Liability Relief and Brownfield Revitalization Act that was passed in January of 2002. Did a couple of things. It outlined what you could do to protect yourself from liability. Generally, that means getting a phase one before you purchase the property, knowing what's on that property, forming due diligence is what they typically call it. And you're often going to be doing some level of diligence to make sure that the property, whatever's on the property or may be on the property, doesn't get any worse. So along with that, kind of partnered with that, is funding. So if it is a true brownfield and you are protecting, yourself from liability, there is funding available through US EPA on an annual basis, and there's also funding through many states. Also, in some private organizations will also offer funding. Typically, your state and federal funding is for assessment. So phase ones and phase twos, we'll talk about those in a minute, and cleanup. And that can also include health monitoring to make sure that the population of residents surrounding the area or businesses surrounding the area aren't being further harmed. Next. So here's your redevelopment process. So identifying brownfields, typically if you're a community, a city that's looking to redevelop brownfields, take care of brownfields problems in your community, you're going to identify them. And that is done through an inventory process. Kansas State offers help with this. There's a lot of guidance that will help you in identifying properties and developing an inventory. Engaging the community. It's very important to have the community involved in this process. They can help you identify brownfields, but you want to get them you want to get them supporting you, and you want to have them feel that they're part of this whole process and have a voice in the process. Set redevelopment goals. This is also where the community can help. The city or community or businesses may have certain goals. You may have a city plan or a county plan that helps you set redevelopment goals, and also the community can help you in letting you know what they feel is important and needed for redevelopment in their area. Then you get into investigating, as I mentioned before. That's a phase one assessment. where it's more of a paperwork type of exercise to find out what went on in this property over time. Then you're actually getting into sampling, which is a phase 2 assessment. And then if that sampling indicates that the levels of contaminants are over what would be considered health-based for the community or for individuals that are working there, you may need to do cleanup. Redevelopment, again, is going to involve your stakeholders and partners, probably your community, and also trying to find and leverage financial resources. Next. Approaches to identifying brownfields. Again, reach out to community stakeholders. Look at the comprehensive plans. Most cities, most communities are going to have some type of redevelopment plan through 2030, some type of plan that is identifying what is important to redevelop in their community, to do, what infrastructure wise, what they want to bring to the community. Maybe they want to bring more employment, different things like that. Those are often encompassed in a plan. And those are good things to look at and get a really good idea of what you want to do with your brownfields. Also drive your gateways to your communities or gateways to local amenities. If you've got a really nice business district or an old downtown, you don't want the gateway or the road that's going there or roads that are going there, surrounded by broken down old factories and things that are blighting essentially your community. So those are often very good targets for redevelopment, cleanup, assessment. And look at your tax delinquent properties. Often these properties have been passed through many hands if they're businesses or industry, and maybe whoever owns them at this time has not kept them up and has not paid the taxes, and they've been forfeited over to your community. So those can be good properties that can be redeveloped in your community. Next. So who identifies properties as brownfields? Do we as the government? Does the EPA? Does the county? It's actually your community. So your stakeholders in your community, you need to get community involvement. They're going to know better oftentimes than you are as a community leader what particular factory or what particular business is really causing blight, maybe inviting crime into their neighborhood, maybe inviting people living there, maybe starting fires, causing safety hazards, something that is inviting to their youth that might also cause accidents, safety hazards, things like that. They're going to be the ones that actually know what needs to be redeveloped because it's a problem and what might be good to put there instead. Next. So you set your redevelopment goals. You can vision it vision what you want for a site, an area or region as appropriate. There are visioning processes. KSU tab can help you with this. And it basically getting your community together, getting your stakeholders together and start prioritizing what really is going to help based on maybe your community's plan and other needs as to what you want to put in an area or how you want to redevelop the site. And then be ready to set goals as to how you want to do this. Maybe you want to go for a grant. Maybe you want to go to Ohio EPA to get a target brownfield assessment, which Shelby will talk about in a little bit. So things like that. And then be ready to adjust and revise the plans as needed. You don't always know what you're going to find as far as contamination, what different things may happen in the future. So be ready to revise plans. Don't just be stuck on one plan and give up if it doesn't work. Next.
Hey, Amy, we'll have
Yeah.
to wrap up here in about 3 minutes.
Oh, thank you so much.
Sure.
So I'll go through quickly what ASTM Phase 1 is. These are typical investigations that are done on these sites. These are, as I mentioned, paperwork type of exercises and interviews with current and past owners. They're not intrusive. They're giving them an idea to know where to sample next. The Phase 2 is where you actually look at areas, what we call recognized environmental conditions based on your Phase 1, where there might be spills, where there are drains, different things like that, where there might be asbestos. And then you start doing the sampling to find out if the contamination is actually there and where it has spread. Next. And then you have cleanup and planning. And those are things like figuring out how you're going to remove any dirty soil if your soil is contaminated, how you might need to do groundwater cleanup, then looking at demolition or rehab, how things like asbestos or lead paint are going to be dealt with if you're demoing a site. Or how it's going to be removed if you're keeping that building. And then you have engineering controls and institutional controls. Engineering are your physical type controls like barriers to vapor mitigation or asphalt to be a barrier to soil contamination. Institutional controls are things like deed restrictions or zoning restrictions. Don't use the groundwater, or don't use this for anything other than an industrial use. Next. I'm going to pass that slide. That's just a repeat. Next. So how do I get all this started? You need resources. Next. And Kansas State tab can help. This assistance is available to units of government, nonprofits, tribal organizations, and it can help you tab partners such as myself or tab managers such as Beth and Roxanne. It can help with identifying and inventorying brownfields, solar and green energy. We have specialists to help with that. Educational workshops, such as what we're doing today. Reviewing EPA grants to make sure that they're going to be competitive and hopefully get you the funding that you need, and also help you identify other funding. So there's a whole list there, and also other assistance can always be provided. Never be fearful of asking us if it's not on the list, if it's something that we can help with, because oftentimes we can. Next. And this is your team more or less in Ohio. Roxanne, our regional director, our assistant regional director, Beth Grisby, and myself, Amy Yursevich. And thank you for your time. And I'm going to pass this on to Shelby to talk about Ohio EPA's help. Next.
Thanks, Amy. That was great. So good morning, everyone. My name is Shelby Powell. I am a project coordinator with the Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program, or TVA, and our state's voluntary cleanup program called VAP. There's lots of acronyms, which are housed at Ohio EPA. And today I will be discussing both programs as well as some funding sources in Ohio. Next. I want you to leave this webinar with a practical understanding of the TBA and VAP programs, their eligibility requirements, and our technical services. This knowledge will be invaluable as you manage your brownfield projects. Next. As Amy discussed, a brownfield is a property that is or believed to be contaminated due to its former use. That makes redevelopment very difficult. Next slide. As Amy also discussed, there are many services needed to assess brownfields. Our primary objective with the TBA program is to promote brownfield redevelopment. By offering free environmental services to communities, we aim to empower community leaders and property owners to turn their blighted properties into thriving economic and community assets. Next slide. The TBA program is accessible to all who are eligible. We offer environmental assessments at no cost to you. If your property is eligible, you can apply for TBA funding at any time during the year. Applying for our services is simple. You can fill out a TBA application on our website at any time. And if you need assistance, I'm always here to help. Next slide. Again, these services are accessible to eligible individuals and organizations, including land banks, local governments, nonprofits, and port authorities. Single-family homes are ineligible, but properties with more than 4 units, such as apartments, are eligible. While our TBA program primarily focuses on commercial or industrial properties, we are open to discussing the eligibility of any property you may have. Property ownership may be necessary for some grants. However, for TBA funds, a signed access agreement from the property owner will suffice. But remember, you do not need to own the property to apply for TBA funds, but you must have access granted before we can begin our services. Next slide. Before acquiring a property, we strongly advise completing a phase 1 environmental site assessment. To recap what Amy said, this provides liability protection and thoroughly examines the property's history, identifying potential contamination areas requiring further investigation. You can also complete a VAP compliant phase 1 through the TBA program, which would be needed to be eligible for the VAP program. I will go into more detail on the VAP program here shortly. Once a phase 1 is completed, a scope of work is developed for phase 2 activities, which could include collecting soil, groundwater, sediment, soil gas, or indoor air samples. The scope of a phase 2 in the TBA program is tailored to the applicant's needs and may include seeking potential funding for cleanup or demolition and conducting a more comprehensive phase 2 or VAP phase 2. Additionally, an asbestos survey can be completed if demolition or renovation is planned. Market analysis services are available to indicate economically feasible reuse options for brownfield sites in your area. Brownfield inventories provide detailed information on brownfield properties and guidance for reusing designated brownfield properties in Ohio. And lastly, a vision plan is a brownfield revitalization plan based on the community's vision. But to clarify, these are just a handful of the services that we provide through the TBA program. And I've included a link at the bottom of the slide to our website that includes more services. But overall, the TBA program offers many free services to help low capacity communities ease into brownfields, as Ohio EPA manages the coordination of planning and technical review of assessments. Next slide. Careful planning is essential for project success. When you seek TBA funds, keep in mind that the time frames for the mentioned activities are determined by the project's Ohio EPA approval date and not the TBA application submission date from the applicant. Next slide. Now let's take a closer look at the Voluntary Action Program, which is our voluntary cleanup program offered by the Ohio EPA. As I previously mentioned, there's a strong connection between the TBA and VAP programs, including the completion of a VAP compliant phase 1 or phase 2 through the TBA program. But what is the goal of VAP? Ultimately, it's to obtain a covenant not to sue, or a CNS, which can be acquired by voluntarily cleaning up a piece of property according to specific VAP standards developed by Ohio EPA. When cleanup requirements are met, the director of the Ohio EPA issues a CNS. Now, this safeguards the property owner or operator from being legally responsible to the state of Ohio for further investigation and cleanup. But this protection only applies when the property is used and maintained as when the covenant was issued. I do want to note that if you have an endpoint for the Ohio Department of Development's Brownfield Remediation Program, details I will expand on later, you must go through VAP to complete a no further action letter. This same process also applies to US EPA grants if you are receiving public funding. Next slide. So if you choose to pursue a property through the Voluntary Action Program, you will need to engage a certified professional, or a CP, to carry out any necessary work. A CP is a qualified expert, such as an engineer or a scientist, certified by Ohio EPA. You can find a list of the certified professionals on our VAP website. Now, depending upon the complexity of the VAP property, multiple phase 2 mobilizations may be required. However, when a certified professional believes that a property has been investigated and, if necessary, cleaned up to the standards contained in the VAP rules, they can prepare a no further action letter and submit it to Ohio EPA for review. The NFA letter describes the environmental problems found at the VAP property, how those environmental problems were investigated, and how the property was cleaned up. If remediation of the property was necessary, the NFA explains the remedial actions undertaken in addition to how the VAP standards were achieved. Upon receipt of an NFA letter, the Ohio EPA initiates a review process and may conduct multiple reviews between Ohio EPA and the CP associated with the project within 30 to 90 days. However, this time frame does vary from project to project. Once it's decided that the NFA letter meets VAP applicable standards, a CNS package is then assembled for signage by the Ohio EPA director and issued to the volunteer. Next slide. At the Ohio EPA, we also provide free technical assistance to help communities navigate the brownfield or VAP processes. Our commitment to supporting projects is unwavering. We are always open to new approaches to assist every step of the way. We are here to help communities succeed. If you plan to take a property through our voluntary action program, we can offer technical review of documents, such as remediation activities, risk mitigation, operations and maintenance, or an NFA letter, or all of the above. The service is designed to assist complex projects in complying with regulations and ensuring that cleanups are adequately protect human health and the environment. Next slide. Now let's move on to other state funding options, including the Ohio Department of Development, which is known for supporting community development and assisting local governments. The Brownfield Remediation Program, which was introduced in 2021, and the initial funding round ended in April of this year, 2024. Development can award up to 75% of the total project cost with a maximum award of $10 million. Ineligible costs cannot be used as match funds, but both US EPA and TBA funds can be used as a match. They also house the Building Demolition and Site Revitalization Program. And while this program does not typically apply or does not apply to typical brownfields, it is aimed at buildings containing asbestos, and can cover up to 75% of the total project cost for demolishing commercial and residential buildings and revitalizing surrounding non-brownfield properties. Again, a 25% match of the project's total cost. Total costs must be committed for the project. And both, again, the US EPA and TB funds can be used as a match. Next slide. We also have Jobs Ohio, which is a private nonprofit corporation that administers many redevelopment incentives for Ohio. The Jobs Ohio Revitalization Program offers loans and grants to bridge the financial gap between the cost of brownfield sites and site redevelopment. The primary focus is on projects where the price of redevelopment and remediation is more than the value of the land, and a site cannot be competitively developed in the current marketplace. Next slide. Jobs Ohio also has the Vibrant Communities program, which recognizes that distressed communities often do not have adequate resources to support specific economic development projects that can attract private investment and create new job opportunities. Thus, the primary focus is on generating reinvestment in eligible distressed communities that have experienced chronic disinvestment. I will note that the program duration extends until June of next year. Next slide. Over at the Ohio Water Development Authority, or OWDA, they offer several loan programs. The Ohio Brownfield Loan Program is popular among redevelopers and local governments due to its reasonably low terms or loan terms and low interest rates. Next slide. Additionally, OWDA has allocated funds for on-site stormwater projects. Managing and reducing stormwater discharges is a continual concern for communities and businesses, and some are including brownfield properties in their stormwater management planning. Next slide. So I want to wrap things up by discussing a federal program called the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization. Next slide. The Interagency Working Group is a newer collaboration effort comprising 12 member agencies across the federal government to help support coal, oil and gas, and power plant communities. Next slide. The working group's primary focus is to secure optimal funding options for communities in need. They concentrate on four main areas: infrastructure, environmental cleanup, entrepreneurship, and workforce development. In the realm of infrastructure, available funding aims to provide reliable broadband, well-maintained roads, clean water, modern sewer systems, and affordable local transportation. While US EPA offers substantial cleanup funding, additional resources can help support land and industrial revitalization efforts, including the implementation of low carbon technologies at former power plant sites and industrial facilities and programs aimed at remediating abandoned mines, orphan wells, and brownfields. Communities also deserve thriving small businesses that drive innovation. This may involve providing support from community development financial institutions, nonprofits, and innovation hubs. Equally important is the support for training programs that align the workforce with actual industry growth in each key region, ensuring that the community's workforce is prepared for the jobs of the future. Next slide. The Economic Development Administration is an example of an agency that is part of the interagency working group. The EDA's competitive grant program focuses on impacted coal communities. Next slide. The infrastructure bill has also poured significant funding into areas that can help a community transition and recover from energy industries, from environmental cleanup to improving water quality and public transit. Next slide. I encourage you to learn more by visiting energycommunities.gov, signing up for email updates, and engaging in the working group social media channels. Next slide. Before I hand you off to Carla, I want to offer our contact details and highlight valuable resources on our website. You'll find the Ohio Brownfields page and a training page with the latest workshops and webinars. We also have an email subscription for updates on funding, application deadlines, and upcoming webinars. Just subscribe under the Department of Environmental Response and Revitalization, and then click on Brownfields. That's all I've got. Now on to Carla.
Carla, are you there? Are you having technical difficulties?
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I was having technical difficulties. I couldn't get myself to unmute or unvideo or start the video. I apologize. Thank you so much. Sorry everybody for the hold up there. My name's Carla Ocker, and I work for US EPA. I'm a Brownfields project manager, project officer, and my role is if you get a US EPA Brownfields grant, I would be the one helping you with that. Our Brownfields grants are cooperative agreements as opposed to straight out grants, so we're substantially involved in those. So my role would be that person who's providing the substantial involvement. I'm going to go over briefly some of our grants that might be of interest to the people in the audience. Next slide, please. First, what grants do we offer? This year, we're offering assessment grants, cleanup grants, and revolving the loan fund grants. As you can see, I've got some of the details of each of those listed here, and I'll elaborate on the assessment and the cleanup grants later on in my presentation. Since this is a grant capacity webinar and are you ready for a grant, I'm not going to go over the revolving loan fund grants because they're very complicated, and generally we provide those to large experienced grantees. But the community-wide, our assessment grants are offered in both community-wide and coalition. The community-wide assessment grants can be used for planning, assessment, and outreach. And the coalition grants differ from the community-wide assessment grants in that you form a coalition with one lead member and 2 to 4 non-lead members. And the purpose of the coalition assessment grants is for the lead member to be more, have greater capacity and more experience, and then they can bring in the non-lead members and kind of help them. This is an effort for us to reach small and rural communities and low capacity communities. Next slide, please. So you think you might want to get a US EPA Brownfields grant. There's a couple things to consider. Are you interested, do you have just a few brownfields? Because if you do, you might be better off with Ohio EPA's Targeted Brownfields Assessment Program that Shelby talked about a few minutes ago. If you have a large number of brownfields in your area, or you have an identified target area or a corridor, you might want to consider one of our US EPA Brownfields grants. The other thing to think about is, does your organization have the knowledge and the capacity to manage a grant? If no, if you're a one-man show and you're wearing multiple hats in your community, you might not want to go for a US EPA grant, and you might be way better off with Ohio EPA's technical assistance grant, or technical assistance where you don't have to manage the grant, or to form a coalition with a lead member who has the capacity and the ability to manage the grant. And also, what's your timeline? Our US EPA grants are offered once a year. The solicitation will come out in the fall of this year, and the grants that are solicited this fall and the grant applications due in like November won't be awarded until they won't be announced until next spring and awarded next fall. So your timeline makes a difference. Next slide. Now, Shelby touched on the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2021. And I want to bring it up again here before I get into the details of our grants, because the bipartisan infrastructure law increased US EPA's brownfields funding significantly. It gave us $1.5 billion to invest over 5 years. About 270,000 of that each year has been given out in what we call our 104K grants. Those are the grants that are the assessment, cleanup, revolving loan fund, job training, and multi-purpose grants. One of the purposes of the bipartisan infrastructure law was to increase our focus on getting funding out to new and low capacity communities. Hence the reason for this webinar today. Are you ready for a grant? Are you a low capacity community? We want to reach out to you. There's also an increased focus on community involvement in cleanup funding. And you'll see the raw numbers on the cleanup funding and how much more we're pushing or encouraging cleanup funding and cleanups when I get into the details of our grants. Next slide. Why do you want to apply now? Well, like I said, the bipartisan infrastructure law increased our funding significantly, and we have 2 more years left of that. That was money that's allocated over 5 years. This year, which is funding FY25, and next year, fiscal year 26, are the last 2 years of bill funding. After that EPA will go back to just our normal regular appropriations. To give you an idea of how much that cutback will be, normally our regular appropriations give us about $90 million to put into assessment, cleanup, revolving loan, what we call MARC grants. Right now, the last 3 years and the next 2 years, we're giving out about $270 million a year. So, in 2 years, we're going to have a 1/3 cut in how much money is available. So the time is ripe. Also, in FY20, when we go back to our regular appropriations, our assessment sites will be limited to only 200. You can only use up to $200,000 of your grant towards each site. And our cleanups will be limited to $500,000 a site. You'll see why that's critical when I get into the details of each of the grants again. Right now, under the bill law, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the money that's provided through that does not require a cost share. Our regular appropriations require a cost share, so that will come back for the cleanup, multi-purpose, and revolving loan fund grants. And those are at 20%. It's a 20% cost share. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit in detail about each of the grant types that might be of interest to you. Like I said, I'm going to focus on assessment grants and cleanup grants, but not talk about our revolving loan fund grants. The community-wide assessment grants are given to a single entity. It can be a county, it can be a municipality, it can be a nonprofit. We offer up to $500,000 per award, and there's a four-year project period. This year, we're planning on awarding about 92 community-wide assessment grants, and those will be broken down into new grantees, a pot of money for new grantees, and a pot of money for existing grantees. And you can see the numbers there, 20 million and 26 million. You see the asterisks for what a new grantee is. A new grantee cannot have an open assessment grant now and cannot have one that had closed prior in 2016 or earlier. Now, the numbers that I'm providing to you here could change. These are just our preliminary estimates on how much money we're going to give out and how many awards per grant type, but they're not going to change significantly. Next slide, please. Now, the coalition assessment grants, as I said, are up to where you have one entity that is the lead coalition member, and they will partner with 2 to 4 non-lead entities. They have a 4-year project period as the same as the community-wide assessment grants, and they can be used for assessment, planning, and community engagement, same as the community-wides. We're estimating awarding up to 29 coalition assessment grants. Next slide, please. As I said, you have one lead member and 2 to 4 non-lead members. One thing that changed in 2023 is that the lead member must be a state, a county, a tribe, regional council, a land bank, or a group of general purpose units of government. The reason we do that is because those are typically the more sophisticated lead members with the capacity to be able to manage the grant. And they also have like a wide geographic area, which is something that we're looking for with these coalition assessment grants. The larger lead members can reach out to some of the small and rural communities that are in their geographic boundary. This year, you must have one non-lead member who has never had a MARC grant. That's multi-purpose assessment revolving loan or cleanup grant from US EPA. That's a change from last year. Last year, none of the grantees of the non-lead members could have an open MARC grant, and that caused some problems for some of our grantees. This year, instead of requiring that none of them have an open grant, one of those non-lead members must have never had a MARC grant, and the other ones have to, if they have, say, an assessment grant or a cleanup grant, if they have one that's open, even currently, they have to have drawn down, which means expended 70% of their current grant. Next slide, please. So what do you think, which is best for you, a coalition or a community-wide assessment grant? You might be wondering that. So there's some pros and cons to each one. Community-wide, you don't have to share the money. You have $500,000 just for your community. And we're awarding a lot of community-wide assessment grants this year. We're estimating 92. But the problem is you have to manage all the grant reporting. You have to hire your environmental consultant or consultants, and you have to follow federal procurement regs to do that. And you have to keep records for, and if you get audited, you're the one who gets audited. Whereas if you have a coalition assessment grant, that lead coalition member is the one who has to manage the grant reporting, follow federal procurement regulations to hire your environmental consultants, and keep all those records. And they would be the one that would get audited, not you. One of the I guess cons, or maybe it's a pro of a coalition assessment grant, is that you need to work with your coalition members and you need to share the funding. So if you're thinking about going for a coalition assessment grant, think about your coalition members early. Think about organizations that you work well with. It makes your grant more competitive if you've worked with some of those coalition members in the past, and you can show that you get along. There's going to be fewer coalition grants awarded, only 29 this year, which is a drop from last year. However, it's a lot more money per grant. You can tap into that lead coalition member's expertise, and you work as a team, and that sometimes is a really good thing. Next slide.
Hey, Carla.
Yeah.
We have a quick question here. For assessment grants, do we apply with a specific list of sites, projects that add up to the grant request? Or do we ask for a certain amount of money and then we have a pot of funds to do assessments over the next few years as they come up?
The second explanation you provided there is the closest to correct. You don't have to come in with a list of sites, but you do, in the grant application, you have to identify a target area. And that's true for the community-wide and coalition grants. And in a coalition grant, each coalition member has to identify a target area, and at least 2 sites need to be assessed within that target area, within each coalition member's target area. So to kind of back up, you have to identify a target area. The majority of your money has to be spent in that target area. And you also need to identify, for a community-wide assessment grant, you have to identify a priority site or a couple of priority sites. You don't want to identify too many priority sites, because as you go through writing your application, if you have too many sites that you're addressing, then you use up all your room in your application. So you identify 1, maybe 2 priority sites, and then answer all the questions within the grant application with regards to those priority sites. Hopefully that wasn't too much information.
Thank you.
Sure. Next slide, please. So cleanup grants. For our cleanup grants, we're offering 3 tiers of cleanups, and there'll be different separate pots of money. Up to 500. The first tier is from 0 to 500. Well, more than 0, of course. Up to $500,000. The second tier is 500,000 to 2 million, and the third tier is 2 million to 4 million. Any of you who noticed our cleanup grants last year, the upper limit was 5 million last year, but we knocked that down to 4 million so we can give out a few more grants. There's no cost share for the cleanup grants because this is bill funding, infrastructure law funding. You have a 4-year project period, and you can see the number of grants that we're planning on awarding for each of those groups. So 30, 23, and 10. Next slide, please. For the cleanup grants, there's a couple things you have to keep in mind in preparation for applying for a cleanup grant. You must own the site by the date of the application. So our grants are going to be solicited in September, and the grants applications will be due probably late November. They'll be due at least 60 days after the request for proposals comes out. So that's going to vary a little bit. You must have completed all appropriate inquiry on your site. You cannot be considered a potentially responsible party as defined by CERCLA or Superfund. That's the law that Amy explained a little bit in her presentation earlier. Another caveat is that sites that have previously been cleaned up or previously received US EPA cleanup money are not eligible. The reason that's significant is pre-bill, we would initially we were giving out $200,000 per cleanup site or per cleanup grant. And then in 2018, we upped that to $500,000 per cleanup site. As you can see from my last slide, we're offering up to $4 million per cleanup site under the Bill Act. So that's another reason why, once again, if you have a big site that needs to be cleaned up, now is the time to apply for grant money. The site also must be fully assessed. What that means is it needs to have a phase 1 and phase 2 assessment that are adequate enough for you to come up with reliable cost estimates. the extent of contamination has to be well defined. Not only that, you have to have a letter from Ohio EPA that states that the site has been characterized thoroughly enough to develop the cleanup plan. And those letters are pretty easy to get, but I suggest you work with TAB and with Ohio EPA to make sure ahead of time that you have adequate assessment. Next slide, please. And this is just a slide that I wanted to include for your reference in case you want to look and see what grants we're offering this year, what the maximum amount of the grant is, and how many grants that we're going to be giving out within each category. And I think that's my last slide. Oh, well, for more information, there's contact information for myself and a plug for a grant writing workshop that's going to be tomorrow, and Shelby's email so you can sign up for the listserv. Okay, I think it's almost break time. So Roxanne, I'm handing it back to you.
Thanks. Next. So just before we go on our break, this is just a reminder that we do have a survey that we'd really appreciate you fill out. You can pull this up now and do it later. So you don't forget, we have a link. It's also in the chat box, and there's also a QR code. And with that, we will come back at 10:15. You guys can go warm up your coffee, take a personal break, whatever you need to do, and we will see you back here at 10:15. Thank you. All right, it's 10:16. Hopefully everybody is back. Dana, next. We are going to start off our presentation with Amy Yursevich and Beth Grigsby with Are You Ready for a Grant? Amy, are you ready?
I am.
Perfect.
Thank you, Roxanne. And if you could go to the next slide. So when we talk about are you ready for a grant and getting ready for a grant, we're talking we're going to be talking with respect to capacities. So what capacities are going to be needed or buckets? What capacities does your organization have? And what capacities does your organization need? So if you've got them all, great. If you don't, as we go through here, we're going to be talking a bit about how Kansas State or other entities can help you with getting those capacities so you're ready to apply for a US EPA grant if that's the right grant for you. Next steps. Okay, here's the capacities we'll be talking about today, the things you really need to do to be prepared for not only obtaining a grant, being successful at getting a US EPA grant or a larger grant like that, as well as actually once you have the grant, maintaining that and managing that successfully. So there is a lot of work to be done along these lines. Carla mentioned this a little bit during her talk, and Carla, as she mentioned, along with others at our region, Region 5, and throughout the country, are project managers who help you go along this particular journey, because there's reporting that has to be done, there's financial management that has to be done. You have to go out and put out a request for proposals or qualifications for a consultant that's going to help you with assessments or cleanups. So there's a lot of moving parts involved in not only obtaining this grant but managing it. Next slide. Okay, so the outreach planning and communication capacity I'm going to talk about. And that there's a lot of outreach that goes into actually before, if you really want to have successful grant application, as well as maintaining and managing that grant afterwards. So do you have the capacity to conduct effective outreach to your citizens and community? Do you have print, web, email, media, access to maybe radio stations or TV stations that can put out PSAs to let people know what's going to be going on with these assessment or cleanup or other planning grants, such as multi-purpose grants? And conduct meetings where interested parties and the public can give meaningful input and comments. Generally, that's going to be, do you have experience doing this? Many communities have, others may need some assistance in this area. Are you able to identify and form partnerships with organizations that will be critical to the success of your project? You may already have partnerships, but what's important is having partners such as developers, such as other community organizations and economic development organizations, as well as community-based organizations, church groups, things like that. The ability to reach out to them, form partnerships, have them actively involved in the grant, as well as possibly giving, providing services or providing outreach on their own to help you out. Have you identified brownfield sites in your community? Are you targeting an area with brownfields issues? So do you know what's out there? Have you done an inventory, or are you more or less aware of where your brownfields are, or do you have a lot of work to do along those lines? And can you develop a brownfields redevelopment project that aligns with and advances with your community's master or land use or other plans. So it's very important that whatever the priorities are of your community, and especially those that have been memorialized in a master plan or a land use plan, are incorporated into your grant and into your grant project. So if you have this, all these capacities, you're in great shape. So you can move forward and start looking at different grants, and you will probably be in a good position to develop and discuss good outreach program in your grant and also manage one. If not, we're going to look at some next slides on how you can get there. Next. Okay, outreach capacity. Identify your cheerleader. There's always one person in your community, in your group, that is really excited about certain initiatives. Who is your best person that is really excited about redeveloping brownfields, fixing up that old industrial site that's blighting the neighborhood? These are the people that you want to have on your team. They're going to bring the energy and hopefully get you to organize a really good outreach program. Begin with your tried and true communication practices. If you use Facebook, if you use other virtual media, do you do a lot of meetings? Do you have community gatherings? Are there community festivals where you show up and communicate things, about your city or township, and try to get a lot of knowledge out there and hopefully buy into projects that you're working on? Local newspapers, other media, radio, TV, that sort of thing is also, if you have that connection there, definitely use it. You want to get meaningful input. So you want to gear your outreach, whether it's print or through virtual media or newspapers, things like that. You want to be able to put that out in a way and have meetings that will actually, and have people at the meetings or that are accessing your other virtual and non-virtual media to be able to provide meaningful input. They get a good understanding of what's going on and how it's going to affect them, and are able to tell you what their thoughts are. Identifying and forming partnerships that are critical to the success. Those quality of the partnerships are more important than the quantity. You want to have partners that are actually going to bring something to the table that is helpful, maybe help you with the outreach, maybe provide other services such as meeting rooms and things like that that will be helpful with actually getting that message out to the community and getting good feedback. And you can work with KSU TAB. We have helped develop outreach plans for communities and helping you identify good community partners. We can help educate your leadership on what brownfields are and why it is so important to actually look at getting grants, look at getting funding for assessment and redevelopment. Next slide. One of the things Kansas State University TAB specializes is building outreach input programs that are geared toward rural and or disadvantaged communities. This can sometimes be difficult because in rural communities, people are spaced farther apart, getting people together, getting people notified appropriately, and making them feel like they're involved in the process and comfortable to give input is helpful. Disadvantaged communities, kind of a similar reason. There may be some because of problems in the past, they may not be willing to be involved. So how to get them to feel like their input is important and needs to be considered, and getting their input and buy-in.
Hey,
Next
Amy,
slide.
I'd like
Yeah.
to just add something to that slide. So what we're finding more and more in these communities is they're not going to come to you. You have to go to them in areas where many times it can be a church, it can be a school, it can be sort of a community like fair. But that's how you start building outreach with those types of communities. So it's not that typical, hey, we're having a public meeting downtown. It's really more about going to them. Thank you.
Right.
Sorry, I
Very
wanted to add
important.
too. Sorry, Amy.
Oh, go ahead.
In Ohio, we took advantage of an online survey. It was a unique opportunity during the pandemic, and we're going to continue that into some future outreaches just to get more participation from the community through advertising that survey through social media and through local businesses. So we got good participation in the small community of Bel Air. So another way to gather some of the input from people that normally don't participate.
Great. Excellent ideas, because as Beth said, and as I was bringing up, you may have some people that just don't feel like they're going to be heard, or because of their distance and things like that, it's really hard to get them to be involved. So you do have to find ways to go out to them. Next slide. Oh, next slide. Strategic planning. So did we get to, can you go back? Yeah, there we go. So some of the things, once you really are getting your citizens involved, getting that community involved, some of the things that you can do that the community can provide a lot of help with, and KSU TAB can help you put together, are things like, as I mentioned before, community outreach and input plans, ways to get out to your community, do things like Dan was discussing with virtual surveys. Also, we can do economic feasibility and sustainability analyses. There are some specialists within KSU TAB on doing these studies and helping the community out to determine what's going to be helpful for the community, what type of redevelopment, and what type of redevelopment is sustainable. Same thing with market studies. There we have specialists that can go out there and find out what is the market for, what would the market bear as far as how we want to redevelop this old industrial commercial site. We can help facilitate conversations with that allow you to come up with redevelopment goals, and we can help with facilitating stakeholder meetings. So getting people to, once they're out there, to give input that is going to be meaningful and important for your redevelopment. Next step. Next slide. Okay, one of the things Kansas State University can help you out with is developing an inventory, either within your targeted area, or even before, if you're looking for a good targeted area, what's going to be a ideal targeted area or areas for your community where you can conduct assessment or cleanup or do planning. Excuse me. And these are also things that having a good input from your community will be extremely helpful. They're the ones that are going to know, with, as I mentioned before, where the brownfield that's in their neighborhood is causing all kinds of problems, and maybe people are going in there and vandalizing the site, or there's safety issues for their youth. They're the ones that are going to know, hey, this area is the one that really needs some help. So their input is going to be valuable, and Kansas State TAB can help you with some of these activities. Next slide. Prioritize your inventory. We can help you coming up with a prioritization scheme. What things are you looking for? And, you know, such as location, things like where they are in the targeted areas, what are your impacts environmentally, particularly if they don't know the contamination, but do know what people are worried about and what's hindering redevelopment. So different things like that. What's the based on where this particular brownfield's at, what is its likelihood of being successful if it's redeveloped into, say, a retail business or a light manufacturing industry. So you come up with ways of prioritizing which of these brownfields should we pay attention to, what should we invest our grant money or other money into as far as moving them forward, as getting assessed, cleaned up, and redeveloped. So KSU can help you identify a prioritization scheme that may work for your community. Next step. Next slide, I mean. Reuse visioning, we've talked about this. Some of this is actually things we've talked about, but Kansas State can help you with visioning, getting your partners, your stakeholders, your community together to decide what are their priorities. What are their priorities? Do they need green space? Do they need a park? Do they need green space to connect into a biking trail that will help, you know, individuals in a disadvantaged neighborhood get to things like grocery stores or health clinics or things like that. So helping identify what those priorities are, what those needs are, and how they can envision what will be at these different brownfield sites. And also Ohio EPA in partnership with TAB, Ohio EPA can provide some of this assistance as well. Next slide. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about financial management capacity. So as I mentioned, there is a financial management component to this, as opposed to things like Shelby talked a little bit about targeted brownfield assessments that Ohio EPA provides. They go out there with their contractors. They do that assessment, and they provide you at the end of the day with a report. If you're a community that hasn't done a whole lot of work with brownfields, that may be something that you want to start out with, looking at a site or two, and you know, working with EPA, and at the end of the day actually getting that report, whether it's a phase 1 or phase 2 or both, in your hand. If you're looking at a US EPA grant, you're going to have to have some experience in managing grants, or at least the financial capacity to do that. So you want to, you know, look into whether your community has managed and complied with other state or federal grant programs and knows some of those reporting and management needs. Does your organization have in-house experience and capacity to review contractor invoices? So make sure that they're not charging too much or charging for something they didn't do. Make payments, draw down grant funds using US EPA's payment system, automated grant payment system. If you know this, if you've had experience with this before, if there are other departments in your community that have, and you can learn from them, you do have the financial capacity and you can move forward. If not, here are some things to think about to get that capacity. Next slide. as I mentioned, Ohio EPA and also US EPA has a targeted brownfield assessment program. They do not require the financial management. So this may be where you want to start. EPA brownfield grants do involve management and funding and do require financial capability. Next slide. How do you get this? Maybe when your local communities, local cities nearby, or a regional entity, such as a land bank or a regional planning agency or economic development agency, may have had grants, US EPA brownfield grants in the past. Look to them. They can probably give you some pointers and what you need to manage a federal brownfield grant. They can help you learn and become comfortable with the financial requirements as well, and let you know, here's what to watch out for. Here's the things to be diligent and manage and be aware of. And as we mentioned before, some of the other state grants that are not just in Ohio, but other states do have different financial management requirements. Kansas State Tab may be able to provide you with contacts from communities in your area. So if you're not aware of a community or a regional entity that has had a US EPA grant before, we may be able to do a little research and find out who they are, and maybe get the two of you together so that you can learn from a neighbor what is needed and whether you can develop capacity. Next slide. So another thing that's really good to look at before you apply for a grant and you're not sure about your financial capacity or capability, take advantage of the financial grants management training. Here's the website down here. They do have pre-recorded webinars, and they have upcoming webinars that you can take a look at and go over what the reporting requirements are, how you draw down from their payment system, ASAP, things like that. So you're aware of what is going to be required of you if you go for a grant and decide if this is something you're ready for at this point in time. Next slide. And now I'm going to pass this on to Beth, who's going to talk about technical and contractor management capability.
Yes, and hi there, everybody. I think what you're noticing here, that if you're a novice in the Brownfields program, it's best to start at the local level. Start with your state. Talk to Dan, talk to the great Ohio EPA folks about, your project. And so you get the gist. And also that helps you in terms of you get maybe assistance where you get those TBAs or you get other assistance, and you grow in your experience, and it looks great when you then are applying for an EPA Brownfields grant. So these are just some great steps, but we'll go to technical and contractor management capacity. And this is important because even though, and I used to be in consulting, and we're good people. Most of us are really good people, but you have to drive the car. You shouldn't be in the back seat with your project and your project control, regardless. So it's very important to start having some of that contractor management capacity. So do you have the technical ability to prepare and actually now an RFQP to procure a qualified environmental consultant who can conduct an environmental assessment? Do you have the resources to work with your state or federal project manager to oversee the project, including reviewing technical reports and generating the required progress reports? So do you have that knowledge? If it's no, start taking a look at the Brownfields guidance on competitive procurement. Now that we'll talk about the difference between the state and the federal. But if you do, great, you're ready to go. But let's look at the next slides for filling your bucket. Next. So procurement requirements are going to depend upon the individual grant services and program. So if you're looking at Ohio EPA targeted brownfield assessment, you don't have to go through the selection process. Ohio and US EPA have already gone through that. But if you do go for a US EPA brownfields grant, there will need to be consultant contractor selection completed by the grantee. There are federal procurement rules where applicable. Next slide, please. So the competitive procurement required for EPA brownfield grants, we've got the guidance, I believe, as a resource. It's important to take note of. These days, you really have to, by the way, listen to Amber today with Lima. She has some experience with federal procurement, but there's some bells and whistles to this. You don't want to restrict the competition. In other words, you don't just put it out for folks with EPA brownfield grant experience only. You have to really put the competition, make sure that it's a fair competition. And you have to use cost. Cost is now a criteria for the evaluation of your consultants or contractors when you're going for a federal grant. Next slide, please. So solving that vicious circle, getting the experience. Well, for one, draw upon experience from maybe the county, regional entities, other communities, other counties, advocacy organizations. Ask them for examples of their RFQP. We do suggest that you don't look at those older than late 2023 due to a little more higher awareness of the federal procurement guidelines. We can assist you with scope assistance and assist you with developing an RFQP. We actually have templates. We have templates for all the brownfields grants, including a template if you plan to hire a grant writer prior to submitting a grant. We have that type of template. We can also provide a review of the RFQP to ensure it meets federal procurement guidelines, and we can assist in reviewing responses to your RFQP as well. Amy's been great at helping communities just kind of sort through what's out there and develop the criteria and assist with some, not so much selection, it's more like, well, this consultant did well on one of the areas response, another might have done better, or they had the experience equivalent needed to do environmental assessments, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. And the best approaches to gaining experience to manage your contractor consultant. Make time to learn on your project. I know it's crazy. I know you're crazy busy with everything going on. And so when you are actually applying for a grant, you have to realize there's going to be your own program management oversight of the consultants. You draw upon your organization's experience if it's large enough, like those that are managing the infrastructure projects, public works engineers, wastewater treatment operators. They know how to read laboratory data. City clerk treasurer for an accounting, ask them for assistance. Draw upon the experience of others, other communities, and advocacy organization. If you have time and can, take OSHA training courses such as health hazardous awareness. You'll see how important it is for you to be dressed for being in the field, especially when you have a lot of activities going on. And we can help you with assistance with technical document review. If you need that assistance, we can help you kind of understand, go through. It seems like it's daunting and difficult, but sometimes if you know what to concentrate on and look at, we can help you and review technical project budgets if you need that type of assistance. Next slide, please. So best approaches to gaining experience when you are in the position, and even now, if you're not working in a grant, but even now, if you have other projects going on, environmental assessment or tank pulling or any type of work like that, ask for more detail on how and why activities cost. This is important because what you will find is over time, in the last year or two, the cost for laboratory, the cost for the consultants and the type of work that they do has really increased. So it's really good to know more about that and why it costs, what it does. Why would you pay this much for laboratory? Well, you have quality assurance that you have to comply with. Ask your consultants to explain maps and databases. They should be your partner in this. What did they find in that phase 1 report? How did they get to those recommendations? Explain those maps. What do those maps mean? What do the databases mean? Make sure that you get a better understanding. And if you have any of these environmental projects where you're meeting with the Ohio EPA, make sure you're present at those meetings. Those are important, and you need to be the face of the community. Many times consultants might assume and assume wrong what your goals are. So you should be present. If you're overseeing field tech's work, why wouldn't you be wearing a white suit if they are, right? Well, there are reasons for that. Find out why. How did they come up with recommendations once they do soil borings, groundwater? Have them explain the process. Explain site-specific safety plans. These are important because, again, if for some reason something happens on your project and someone gets hurt, the project, of course, is stopped, but also you're the face to the community on what's going on there. Why are you over budget? Why aren't you informed? These are all things that you think about when you're managing a contractor consultant. Next slide, please. And so there's acres, and that's a great way to do EPA Brownfield grant reporting. And there is technical work that you report. So that is something, if you do go after an EPA Brownfields grant, you will be looking at training for acres, because you, as the project manager, are really you're the lead on that. Next slide, please. And so EPA grant, hopefully you're going for it. Join Ohio EPA Ohio Brownfields and KSU tab for the next few days. We'll even get in a little more detail. We'll cover the components of the US EPA Brownfields grant application with suggestions on how to fully answer criteria. And it's going to be great. It always is every year. Next slide, please. So here are some links that I think would be helpful for you. Check out the closed solicitations for resource materials developed by each grant type for last year. Guidelines don't change that much. There are always tweaks though, so keep an eye on that. But you can get an idea of what you're getting in for by taking a look at the grants. There's also, up until August 31st, EPA has posted the recent successful and unsuccessful grant proposals. You can find them at this link, or go to www.ksutab.org and select Tab Easy. That's kind of your one-stop shop for EPA assessment and cleanup applications, walks you through each application, threshold, narrative criteria. Next slide, please. Oh, and now we're passing it on to Jen Lentz with the Port Authority, Cincinnati Port Authority. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here with you guys today. You guys have received a lot of really great information so far. Hopefully the information I'll share with you will also be helpful. I'll be reviewing a little bit about my role at the Cincinnati Port, what we do at the port and how we do it, and then focus on a little bit of work that we utilize and how we use Ohio TBA services to fill in some gaps in some financing. So I joined the port actually in October 2022, so I haven't even been there for 2 years yet. But prior to joining that, I was in environmental consulting, similar to Beth. We are good people. You can trust us. Ask lots of questions. That is great advice. So my background in consulting, I did start out as field scientist, worked up to environmental division manager, and with those 2 decades of experience, all of that was focused on planned redevelopment. But I really didn't have a lot of experience on the actual redevelopment prior to joining the port. I joked a lot that my prior experience was underground versus above ground. Next slide, please. So in my role at the port, I support their efforts to acquire, clean up, and reposition these vacant and underutilized sites that we've been talking about across our organization's neighborhood business development lines. Our strategic framework focuses on these 4 pillars of work, and economic equity is the foundation of all of it. We partner with the city and smaller municipalities to secure and manage the federal and state funding, and we take on some of the region's most challenging projects. We take on the projects that others either can't or won't. Because of the large capacity that we have, we are able to take on those projects. Alongside Chris Meyer, he's the port's director of industrial development. We work to advance specifically the port's industrial strategy. We try to take these forgotten industrial sites and make them more attractive again to manufacturers, bringing in those high-paying jobs that are going to support family supporting incomes. So part of that work does include securing the public control and ownership of these properties, leading those remedial efforts, the assessment efforts, and ultimately preparing the sites for redevelopment. In conjunction with that work, we work very, very closely with the city and the county to identify and inventory those brownfield sites that we talk about, and then secure the access to those vacant, blighted, and often contaminated sites. Next slide, please. So the port actually also manages the Hamilton County Land Reutilization Corporation, the Hamilton County Land Bank, which has the legal authority to acquire the properties, which might be in tax foreclosure or in legal forfeitures. This is another mechanism through which the port can obtain control of a problem property. The relationship between the port is a relatively unique one. It's the only one of its kind throughout Ohio. And the port was established in 2001. It's governed by a 10-person board of directors. Half of those are appointed by the city. The other half are appointed by the county. The land bank wasn't established until 10 years later in 2011. That's governed by a 9-person board of directors, and it's made up of civic leaders and experts locally here in business and real estate. In February 2012 is when the port was actually contracted to serve as the management company for the land bank. So under that agreement, the port staff provides all the executive and the administrative services for the land bank. And then that relationship allows the land bank to utilize all the tools, the expertise, the resources of the port to efficiently carry out those land bank goals and purposes. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the relationship is very unique and very, very symbiotic. So each of the entities, the Cincinnati Port and also the Hamilton County Land Bank, they bring their specific powers and abilities to all the projects that we take on. The land bank, with its protective nature, they can unlock a lot of these properties that have held the communities back, sometimes for decades. We've all driven past so many sites that have been blighted, vacant for years and years. And often it is these land banks that can help
acquire the property through those either delinquent taxes and clear the delinquent taxes, but acquiring the property either through foreclosure or contracts to perform nuisance abatement. The land bank has its own set of funding to stabilize, demolish, clean up, and rehabilitate the properties in its care. And it also has the clear exemption from the property taxes on those properties. So often if the port or if the land bank acquires a property, we will keep it held there to not pay taxes on it until we can secure funding to actually perform the rest of the assessment activities. So the port, we can also gain access and ownership, although typically it is through acquisition, oftentimes using funding that's been provided by the city or county or other funds. And we also have our own set of funding sources to perform the cleanup and the redevelopment, including our public finance and our bond funds. And the sales tax exemption status for the port is an invaluable tool that helps make a lot of the projects possible, which wouldn't be completed without the type of partnership between the port and the land bank. The two do complement each other very perfectly. Next slide, please.
Chocolate.
Peanut butter.
Hey!
Oh, hey, you got your chocolate and my peanut butter.
Peanut butter on my chocolate.
What? Delicious.
Two great chocolate, delicious peanut butter.
Reese's peanut butter cup.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So all jokes aside, the relationship.
Peanut butter.
Hey!
Oh, hey, you got your chocolate and my peanut butter.
Peanut butter on my chocolate.
I can take no credit for this video at all. This was all put together by Chris Meyer. But all jokes aside, the two really do complement one another perfectly. And the relationship has really proven to be a smart and efficient model for sharing services amongst the two entities, which for us helps strengthen our regional revitalization capacity through removing the blight and preparing these sites for redevelopment. So as we've already talked about so far, and as you guys know, it takes a lot of capacity to get these sites redeveloped, and it takes ongoing funding. One of the first tasks that I was proposed to do after joining the port was to write a US EPA multi-purpose grant application for fiscal year 23. I had never written one before, and I was very, very pleased to have KSU tab services for the questions that I had during the writing process. They helped review my draft application. So special thanks to Amy, Beth, Roxanne, and all the team for all that they do to assist communities. I really can't recommend reaching out to them enough. And in fact, we did get a successful award of the multi-purpose grant, and KSU tab reached out immediately upon notice of award to let us know that they're here for us and for any questions along the way. So it really is so great to form these partnerships and reach out whenever you do need help. So with the successful award of that grant, we are lucky enough to have Carla Ocker as our project officer for the cooperative agreement. She is great to work with. She and all the team at Region 5 are incredibly valuable, such gems. Carla has been great with not only helping us identify creative ways to continue using our multi-purpose and really get the most out of that cooperative agreement, but also with identifying other opportunities for sourcing that may be available to us in our area, which is great. Any ways to increase our capacity is useful. So this slide here, I'm just showing that in addition to our multi-purpose grant, we do have numerous other sources of funding available. Many of these shall be already touched on in her presentation. But in addition to our multi-purpose, we also do manage a revolving loan fund that Carla had mentioned briefly. We also have numerous grants provided by Ohio Department of Development through their demolition and site revitalization program, and also through their Brownfield remediation program. ODOD, the ODOD, sorry, I just read one of the comments, it made me giggle. The ODOD programs also, I'm sure many of you are aware of the past availability of the Abandoned Gas Station Grant Program, which is just another mechanism of the funding that we have available. And then we also receive a lot of project grants from Hamilton County, from Jobs Ohio, and from the city as well. But despite all these sources of funding, there is still a lot of project sites that we have where the port, the land bank, the city, or other smaller communities may lack the funds to complete the assessment work. One of the resources that we have utilized a lot and has been invaluable for filling in our gaps in funding is Ohio EPA's Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program. This was another that I had not utilized prior to joining the port, and we utilize this tool on behalf of many smaller communities and applicants throughout Hamilton County as needed and as they're eligible. In fact, over the last year and a half, TBA program has provided us resources to complete 6 site assessments. That's phase 1, phase 2, and asbestos and hazardous material surveys. So I've only been at the port for 2 years. We've gotten that much success out of a year and a half. You can do the math. It's a great resource. I would highly recommend using it. Next slide, please. So one of the sites that we aggressively use TBA services for is a former Reliable Castings site. So this was actually the disposal site for a foundry that was here in Cincinnati area. They, in the late 1970s, Reliable Castings purchased this 5-acre undeveloped property. It was historically agricultural. There was a small little farmstead on it. But they purchased the property and began disposing their aluminum, brass, bronze, casting waste, foundry sands, waste binders, and other material on the site. And they continued to do that until about 2011. They did have a permit to actually use this site as a fill site. However, there was evidence throughout the years that there may have been some other items dumped there that were not part of the cut fill permit. There was a previous phase 2 that was done at the site that had identified some metals contamination to the soils and groundwater beneath the site. And we knew that additional assessment needed to be done to find out what was actually there and what was it actually impacting, and what was the potential reuse for the site. What would we need to do to get this put back into its best and productive use? The TBA program to the rescue. We reached out to Dan and Shelby and requested some additional assessment activities at the site, and they performed, their contractors performed additional phase 1 and phase 2 work out there to identify what we had. And the great results were that we actually did not have contamination here that was in excess of our proposed redevelopment, which was to keep the site actually as commercial industrial, just because of the basis of all the fill that was placed. And you can see in the historical photos that I have on the screen, just the amount of fill that was placed, even just between 1986 and 2006 across the site. So with Ohio TBA providing those resources to complete the phase 1 and 2, it was hugely helpful. And because the contaminant levels were not in excess of what would be appropriate for commercial industrial use or construction worker safety, we still needed, we were very pleased with those results, but still didn't know exactly what we could use the site for. Since the fill had been kind of haphazardly placed over the site for over 30 years, would it support structures? Would we need to plan to excavate and replace those unsuitable fill materials with something more suitable for construction? The site is also adjacent to the Mill Creek and it's sloped. So what is the true developable acreage? These are all questions that we did not have the answers to. And end use planning is just another one of the resources that the TBA program offers. So once again, TBA to the rescue. We reached out to Dan and Shelby to just discuss what can we do? What resources do you have available with your contractors to perform additional assessment to get us some of those answers that we needed? So we had a discussion and decided that doing a geotechnical survey on the subsurface materials, an evaluation of developable acreage, and then doing some vision planning and concept reuse design would be what the community really needed to answer. And with that information, we would be another step forward in putting the site back to productive use. So I don't have any findings from that to share yet. They're actually going to be doing the field work later this week, but soon we will have the answers that we need to move this project forward, which is incredibly exciting. Next slide, please. So if you have a vacant, blighted problem site in your community, there is absolutely hope, beyond the numerous resources that have been discussed today. Please feel free to reach out to me at the port if you're anywhere within Hamilton County. As it was mentioned before, the land bank has been designated as the lead entity for a lot of the Ohio Department of Development grant programs. And so we can be in assistance in that area if you are interested in submitting an application. And we have partnered with many of the local communities for those applications. In fact, many of you that are on the call today, I recognize your names. And so these partnerships are just an incredibly great way of increasing capacity. We're all working towards the same goal here. And we're happy to help. So please reach out anytime. There's my contact information. And with that, I'll pass it on to Amber with City of Lima.
Hi, I am Amber Merchant with the City of Lima. I am the Workforce and Small Business Development Coordinator for the city. So thank you to all the other presenters. Thank you for this invitation to speak to you today. And my goals here are to continue to build your confidence in seeking these grant opportunities, to share our experience here at the City of Lima and how those buckets that were shared by KSU Tab earlier really do help you in developing your grant applications. And then finally, not to blow up everyone else's presentation by anything that I say. So I would, after hearing Carla speak, I would identify Lima as a new and low capacity community. So we were awarded in the 2023 citywide Brownfield assessment grant from the US EPA. Next slide, please. So looking at our city's history, looking at your city's history is important in your application. City of Lima was founded in 1831. We are located on I-75 in between Dayton and Toledo. Right in that corridor, we are in the northwestern section of the state. We do have a population around 35,000 individuals. We were established, as I said, in 1831. One of our founding industries was the Lima Locomotive Works. We had 5 train lines, railroad lines that came through the city of Lima, which really caused a growth in our city. Next slide. In 1885, we found oil here in the city of Lima, which caused an incredible boom in our economy and also our populations. We tripled in size. Then in 1925, we had Superior Coach Company born here in Lima. Next slide. Today, we still have the Lima Army Tank Plant, which was founded in 1941, now Joint Systems Manufacturing. 1957, the Ford Motor Company Lima plant was founded here in Lima. So a very rich history in manufacturing. Next slide. And I don't think that our story is anything special or something that's not uncommon here, especially in Ohio. We saw that great boom, and then we saw the Rust Belt decline. We saw our population drop. And then we see this abandonment of properties and assume contamination of these properties throughout our city and our region. Next slide. Oh, as I said, we were awarded that citywide grant assessment from the US EPA. During the summer of 2022, I joined the City of Lima's admin team. I come from a social service background. So this is where I'm going to try not to blow up what other people have said. I have very limited experience with Brownfield management. I was invited to a meeting And the summer of 2022, I'd been with the city for about a month, and an invitation pops up to meet with a consultant for Brownfield. And I was like, I'll go. What's a Brownfield? And so I Googled it. And that's where my journey began. So this consultant came to us to pursue the US EPA citywide Brownfield assessment, told us why our city would be a great applicant for this, gave us the reasons why, and we did agree to sign an agreement with that contractor. They were very direct and specific that would only be to write this application to partner with us. So we did collaborate with that consultant on the construction of our application. So we gathered the needed information, verified the contractor's work, we submitted it, and then you wait. As was mentioned earlier, you submit this in November, and then it's not until early summer in our case. It was about mid-May that next year that the announcements and the awards were announced. So during that wait, I attended every single training and every single learning opportunity that was provided to increase my knowledge, just so that way I could be in a driver's seat. Because when it comes to management of this grant, you need to know what you are doing. Next slide. So looking at the buckets, bucket number one, which was the outreach capacity. We are the city of Lima, so we are very accustomed to having meetings, right? I've already missed 2 meetings today to be here with you all, so thank you all for that. We have town halls, community meetings. Last night, of course, we had council. We have open meetings, commission meetings. The list goes on and on. We're one of those entities that brings people together, and we do see participation throughout our community with our meetings. Mayor Smith is committed to engaging with our residents and stakeholders in open forum meetings and discuss all aspects of city business. So again, that's really just enriched in what we want to do as a city here. It's part of our culture. When we look at communication, we have a public information officer with the city of Lima. So she is in charge of ensuring that everything is up to date on our social media platforms, that we are getting information to our local radio station, local TV stations, newspaper, and so on. So that is her responsibility, and really helps shares that responsibility of ensuring that city communications are getting out to our community. We do have a cable access station. So we have our own TV station that does run our city council meeting as well as other community meetings. We have established social media platforms. We have regular radio spots. They're weekly in the morning. WIMA, if anyone's interested in tuning in on Tuesday at 8 a.m., you can hear from the city. And then we have monthly spots on our local noon, what do you call that? News, right? So our news, we are there monthly. We have strong public partnerships. I saw the question earlier, do we need to list those partnerships? Absolutely. When you're applying for any of these grants, having that collaborative just thought process and the establishment of those partnerships are strong public, civic, private. Those are very good. Just kind of establishing that within your application that yes, we are a leader and we are partners in our community. We also have the City of Lima Vision 2040 plan. So this really did provide a base to say this is what we see for our city moving forward. And this did support the application. And then of course we have our consultants at KSU TAP and our contractor, who your contractor can also help with the outreach and capacity once you move into that grant. Next slide. We look at financial develop or capacity. We were very blessed here at the City of Lima. We have our finance department, we have our city auditor. They work well together. They work well with every single one of us. They have experience in overseeing, managing, drawing down funds from State of Ohio grants, federal grants, private grants, all of the things. So when we look at that financial management piece, very well established. We have seasoned staff, and they are versed financially. So I have also participated in the EPA financial management training. So that's not something that I had experience with, but did have experience overseeing grants, pulling down funds of my own. Again, following what Carla had said earlier, making sure that you're able to document. I love a form, I love a file, and I love a spreadsheet. So if you have that, you can also do this as well. Next slide. Bucket 3, the technical and contractor management capacity. All right. Well, this got interesting for us. When we were awarded the grant, we then had the opportunity to go out and seek a consultant to help us implement this grant that we have been awarded. And we did face several challenges with the RFPQ process. Make sure that you refer, if you are awarded, even before you are awarded, look at the US EPA Brownfield grant guidance on competitively procuring a contractor when writing a bid proposal. Sorry, so a question I'm trying to answer them as they come up. The RFPQ must be, when you're writing this bid proposal, make sure that the RFPQ must be free from any and all perceived biases or exclusions. You cannot have any assistance or guidance from a potential contractor. So if you had assistance writing your grant and maybe you worked well with that contractor and you know they might apply for your RFPQ, they're done. You aren't talking to them. They don't exist. They are just completely cut off from you because you don't want to have them automatically eliminated. What I did is I went out there, I Google searched Brownfield RFPQs. I reached out to past awardees. I reached out to the US EPA. I reached out to KSU TAB, who was very collaborative. They were very supportive. They were there with any and all my silly questions. They responded quickly and in a timely fashion and really supported us through this process. So what happened during our experience? So I did emphasize making sure that you do not have any kind of bias. So our experience, we released our first RFP in July 2023 with bids opening in August. This RFP introduction stated that we had received a Brownfield assessment grant, all in capital letters. That's important, okay? Well, Brownfield capital assessment grant, got it? And the respondent qualifications, we had listed experience with Brownfield capital B, assessment capital A, and grants capital G, and associated project guidelines as an evaluation metric. We were told and informed that this may have potentially limited consultants from applying because I had capitalized our Brownfield assessment grant in the title, and then I capitalized it on down and looking for qualifications with experience in that area. So for this reason, we did have to terminate that. We closed out, we had opened them, okay? So I was in the process of reviewing these RFPs, which I had 8 of them, and we had to cancel that RFP. I had to notify all of the individuals who had submitted, all the contractors that we were canceling this RFP, and we would be opening it back up. We'd be drafting a new one. So with the help of KSU, also, we had the US EPA step in for our second request for bid, our RFPQ. We omitted the word Brownfield completely from our RFPQ, unless it was the title of the project and requested a we just omitted it. We also added the requested proposed cost for the environmental services for the US EPA Brownfield grant guidance. I did not include that in our first one. As we knew from our work plan, this is what the task costs, but we're encouraged to put that in that second go round. So we added that cost, we took out Brownfield, and we used environmental consultant, environmental testing, really anything that we could do that did not use the word brownfield, just to establish that we were looking for environmental consultants, professionals to assist us with our project. So this second RFPQ was published on September 6th of 2023. And by September 11th of 2023, we had to cancel the bid as we received a complaint for not complying with Ohio's qualification-based law selection for professional engineers, architects, and surveyors. So this was a little devastating. I felt a little defeated at this point. So I reached back out to KSU and was like, what is this? We, of course, had our legal team involved, and eventually we had the US EPA legal department reviewing this. So our legal department reviewed the complaint first. We then passed it on to the US EPA legal department, who reviewed the complaint. And it was founded that we were in compliance because we were following the US EPA guidance for procurement, and we were not asking for intellectual property, just professional services. So the complaint did say that by asking for the service costs that we were crossing over into intellectual property for an architect, engineer, surveyors. But because we were just asking for their service fees, we were not actually like, give us a proposal, design this bridge for us, let's say, and give it to us. So they decided that we were not breaking any rules. So then we went for a rebid for a third and final time on October 14th. We did successfully award that third time. Another thing to keep in mind is those two times that I had to cancel the bids, I had to send out notices to those who had either had questions, who had submitted the first go around, those 8, and just let them know that these are being canceled. Of course, I was flooded with questions like, why is this going? What was wrong? And I really had to be somewhat quiet because you don't want to eliminate or give a preference or give any kind of any biased support, right? So less was more when you are looking at canceling bids. Hopefully no one has to do that. But staying impartial is very, very important in this. Next slide, please. All right, so how is it going? We just wrapped up. Oh, sorry, I jumped a slide ahead on my own. So looking still at that technical and contractor management piece, make sure once you've awarded this, your project management, rely on your work plan to guide you through your next steps. Relationships are incredibly important. Make sure that you have great relationships with your finance team within your own department. Make sure that as was shared earlier, that you have relationships within your community, within your public works, your streets, wherever it might be, that you can rely on those individuals to step up and support the work of your brownfield management. The US EPA, we work with Eric. Unfortunately, we don't get work with Carla, but Eric is great as well. We have a great relationship with him. I go to him with questions. He was very supportive through our bid process as we face those challenges. Relationships with your community, ensuring that those stakeholders are involved, that you can bring people in, and make sure that you're asking questions of your consultant, asking questions of the US EPA, asking questions of KSU, asking questions of just anyone who you know who has that experience is very important. When we look at reporting, defining those reporting rules in the RFP or RFPQ is something that you are able to do. So if you are looking for your contractor to help you or with the submission of those acre reports, that is something that you can build into your RFPQ. If you would like that assistance, if you don't have that knowledge of those technical reports that you will need to write. I don't have that experience. I'm learning. And honestly, the US EPA reports so far, the quarterly reports have not been that overwhelming. I was very intimidated by the thought of those, but have been able to manage those. And now with the support of our contractor, I feel very secure every time that those come around, that knowing that this will be okay. So you can really guide that ship with your RFPQ. Knowing in your RFPQ things that are important to you, if it is a community, if you would like them to do some of that community outreach for you, build that into your RFPQ. Make sure that you're setting up how many meetings, when you would like someone to be there, how you would like assistance. Some contractors may have experience with doing this other places, and they may just be able to ship over to you like, hey, here's a nice little flyer that we've used, and you can update it. So there are definitely ways to work with your RFPQ to help support the work that you will need to manage this grant. But again, your own knowledge and building that foundation so you're not being told what's going on, that you can work collaboratively is important as well. All right, next slide for real. So how is it going? So we just wrapped up our third quarter of the grant. So we're entering into our fourth quarter. And I have to say, I think it's going pretty well so far. We have a great relationship with our contractor. We have a great relationship with our US EPA manager. We are getting along as a staff, making sure that this all goes well. So it's going well. We have had community meetings. We kicked off on May 2nd. With a community meeting, we have received over 15 submissions from our public of sites. So we are building our inventory. We have, this says 3, but we now have 4 phase 1s underway. So that one that says double site starting any day, it is actually starting tomorrow, which they've done some preliminary work in the office already. We have 2 owner submitted sites pending access agreements. So when we wrote our grant, our target area did line up with our Vision 2040 plan. It also lined up with some of the work that I am doing from the small business world, with investments into small businesses and corridors that we are targeting. So we overlap those there. And we did identify 2 sites within our targeted area. And we're still seeking access to those sites. So when someone had asked earlier, do you list all of your properties or just specific ones? We listed 2 in our application when we applied. As far as future plans, we will start the phase 2, of course, once we get through some of these initial phase 1s. We do have 19 phase 1s that we are able to fund, and then we will have 9 phase 2s that we're able to fund. So we'll have the phase 2, and then we will have revisioning, redevelopment, which we are looking forward to. We'll be seeking additional funds. We wrote that into our RFPQ. That was really something that we wanted to see our contractor able to leverage our funds now and push us into that next stage of the grant process and the redevelopment process. And that. So relationships, again, very key to all of this. And that is it. I am here. Next slide, please. If anyone has any questions, if anyone would like to know more about our process, if you would like any copies of what we have submitted, what we have done, our RFPQ, our application, I am happy to share any of that with you all because it can be a little overwhelming, but I promise it is definitely worth it. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. Oh, so I will pass this along to Amy. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Amber. It's been a wonderful pleasure working with you, and thanks for the wonderful presentation. Really gives everyone a good idea of, getting through it for the first time, maybe a little few bumps. I am going to talk a little bit about some of the resources, a couple of the resources that we have. When you registered for this workshop, on the TAB website, there is a resources section. In addition to these two, there are other resources such as procuring a contractor, as Beth talked about, and just some other helpful resources. So I really encourage you to take a look at what we have. And if there's something there that we don't have that you feel you need, give Beth or I or Roxanne a call or an email, because we may have it. So anyway, this is what a checklist. And when we were first working on and first creating this particular webinar, we've had it for a couple of years now. Ohio EPA thought it would be helpful to have a checklist that kind of walked you through the buckets. So that's what this is. If you find this at all helpful, if you're thinking about applying for a grant, particularly for the first time, this just goes through the capacities, and you can write notes on it. It gives you some helpful hints, contact, KSU tab, or go to this website, and it will let you know where you can find some assistance or who you can talk to at KSU. Usually you start with Roxanne or Beth, or you can start with me as far as moving forward. So encourage you to print it out. If you find it at all helpful, please use it. The second resource document is gives you a lot of websites. If you want to put that up next. Okay, this is just a first, maybe half page of this document, but it goes through a lot of the different funding options that you may have either at the state level or at the federal level. And along with that, some of the things that you need to think about when you are going to apply or ask for these kinds of help, like Ohio EPA Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program. One of the things is you want to make sure that you're not a responsible party. And there's a link that will help walk you through that and give you pointers on that. People like Carla and others at Region 5 EPA can also help out with making those determinations. Sometimes they can get complicated, and they're also a determination that has to be made for a US EPA cleanup grant. So it's kind of taking you through determining whether you're a responsible party and giving you links where you can get help for that. Does the same thing for some of the EPA grants and gives you links for, maybe either KSU tab, documents, fact sheets, or US EPA websites or documents that will be helpful as you go through and apply for any of these funding opportunities. So encourage you to look at that as well. And again, there are other resources there that you may find to be helpful. If you need something, like I said, just give us a call. We may very well have it, or we'll hopefully be able to find out an answer for you. And that is it. Beth, were you going to go through the last slides?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, thanks. Next, please.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to do the wrap up here, talk about evaluations and next steps is an important piece, and then Q&A. Next slide, please. So please help us with your evaluations. We want to know, what did we miss? What do we want to expand on? How can we improve? And our Ohio Brownfields team thanks you if you can do this for us. You can click the link in chat for the QR code. Scan this QR code now with your smartphone or follow up with the link. So anyway, it's really important to us. And it's also, it's our report card to the EPA on how we're doing here. Next slide, please. Can someone put the QR code in the chat, please, for us? So everyone can get that. Okay, next steps to consider working on now. Where's your brownfield or brownfields? If you don't own the property, will site access be an issue? What's definitely an issue if you want to take advantage of Ohio EPA services or the EPA Brownfields grant. Do you have an inventory of sites? And of course, we mentioned earlier, KSU tab can assist you with that. And as mentioned in the chat, all of our services are free of charge. Everything from the architecture, vision renderings to, an inventory to outreach. Is your site eligible? This is the time to contact Ohio EPA for the state program and EPA for the federal program, particularly if you're looking for cleanup funding. This is the time. Find out about your eligibility. Determine the type of EPA Brownfields grant you'd like to secure. Remember, you must own the property if you're considering cleanup funding. You do not need to you don't need to own the property if you're applying for assessment grants or coalition assessment grants. The contact tab or the EPA for assistance. Next slide, please. And now it's kind of a Q&A, and I'm curious if anyone does have questions. I'd appreciate you put them in the chat, but please work on your evaluations. That's your homework. And then the next 2 days are going to be awesome. We're going to go into the nitty-gritty of the grants, not as general. So I hope you join us tomorrow for Wednesday's webinar. Thank you much. I'll just pass it to Roxanne.
Thank you so much. That concludes our webinar. If you guys don't have any other questions, we are done, and you can follow up with any emails or anything as necessary. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you over the next 2 days. Have a good afternoon.